My supervisor moved me to the basement, blocked my vacation, and told HR I was inappropriate with him after I rejected his advances. I sent his wife an invoice that didn't just expose his disgusting betrayal, it detonated his entire life in front of our whole office. The explosion was deafening, and part of me felt terrifyingly sick, but another part? Pure, unadulterated satisfaction. For months, I worked as an inventory manager at a medical supply company, just trying to make ends meet. My boss, Ralph, was the regional director. He pulled in six figures, drove a luxury SUV, lived in a house with a pool, and yet he constantly complained about money. Ralph was 52, married to Janet, and had 5 kids. A picture of respectable family life, right? Then my car broke down. I was struggling to save for repairs, and Ralph, seeing his chance, swooped in. He offered to pick me up for work every morning, saying he lived on my route. I tried to say no, to take the bus, but he insisted. "It's what good bosses do for their employees," he'd say, making a grand show of his generosity in the office. Every morning at 7 a.m., he'd honk outside my apartment. I'd run down, so incredibly grateful for the help. The ride started normally enough. Work talk, radio music. But then it shifted. Ralph started getting weird. He'd comment on my outfit. "That skirt looks nice," he'd say, or "Are you wearing perfume?" He'd take longer routes, claiming he wanted to show me something, then drive past romantic restaurants, suggesting we should try them sometime. At red lights, his hand would land on my knee. He'd call me his favorite employee. When I recoiled, he'd just laugh it off. "Just being friendly." I tried to make myself invisible. Baggy clothes, no makeup. But Ralph just said I looked tired, that I needed to take better care of myself for the workplace. After 2 months, the questions started about my dating life. "You're too pretty to be single," he'd declare. "Guys must be idiots." Then came the complaints about Janet, his wife. How she didn't understand him after 23 years. How younger women had more energy and enthusiasm. His kids were exhausting, he said, fantasizing about starting fresh with someone who appreciated him. I desperately tried to change the subject, but he'd always circle back, telling me I was such a good listener. By the 3rd month, he asked me to dinner. To discuss a promotion, he claimed. I suggested lunch at the office, but he insisted dinner was better for important conversations. When I flat out refused, that's when the mask completely dropped. He actually reminded me about all those free rides. He'd calculated the mileage, the wear and tear on his luxury SUV. "You owe me $800, he said. I laughed. I actually laughed, thinking it was some kind of sick joke. But Ralph didn't laugh back. He pulled out an itemized bill. Dates, distances, everything. He said he'd waive it if I'd just have dinner with him to discuss my career growth. I was stunned. I reminded him he'd offered those rides freely. He just stared me down. "Nothing is free," he sneered. "You've been taking advantage of my generosity." The next Monday, his luxury SUV didn't show up. I took the bus. At work, Ralph painted me as the villain. Ungrateful, he told everyone, after everything he'd done for me. Then the real punishment began. He moved my desk, not just to a different cubicle, but to the basement storage area, claiming I needed to be closer to inventory. He scheduled me for every single weekend shift. My vacation request, submitted months ago, was denied. My projects were given away, and I was left with nothing but old paperwork. When I complained to HR, Ralph doubled down. He told them I'd been inappropriate with him during our rides, and he'd had to create distance for professionalism. HR believed him. Why wouldn't they? Why would a married father of 5 lie about a young female employee? That's when it hit me. I was trapped, and that's when I started planning. I knew Ralph had a weekly poker game with other executives, where they drink and complain about their wives. I also knew Janet, his wife, was already suspicious. She'd called the office multiple times, asking where he was during lunch. So I created Executive Transportation Solutions, a fake company. I made professional-looking invoices, complete with a logo. And then I sent Janet an invoice for $1,200. The charge? Ralph's premium girlfriend experience package. I itemized everything with dates that perfectly matched his drives with me, but I described them very, very differently. My morning rides became intimate conversation sessions. His longer routes? scenic romance tours. His creepy comments, I listed them as compliment packages. I even included a note. Ralph mentioned expanding my business to his poker friends. Would Janet like a friends and family discount for investigating her husband's activities? Tuesday morning. The office was quiet, that normal, mundane hum. Then a shriek. A woman's voice screaming. It echoed off every wall in the building like a siren. Janet. Her voice cut through the quiet, demanding answers. I was in the basement, surrounded by boxes of medical supplies, the sound bouncing down the metal stairwell. Romantic drives. Girlfriend experience packages. Premium emotional support services. My hands shook so hard the pen clattered onto my desk. Every word she yelled upstairs was something I had written on that fake invoice. And now she was here, demanding answers. From Ralph. In front of everyone. Part of me felt sick with fear. What had I done? But another part felt this weird, exhilarating rush of relief. Someone finally believed something was wrong, even if I had to trick her into seeing it. I heard chairs scraping upstairs. Footsteps moved towards Ralph's corner office. Janet's voice got even louder, no longer muffled by walls. She was in his office now. Everyone on the main floor could hear. Ralph's voice came through the ceiling. But I couldn't make out his words, just the tone. Calm. Reasonable. The way he always tried to sound when he wanted to control a situation. Janet wasn't having any of it. She kept yelling about the itemized dates and times, the romantic scenic tours, and intimate conversation sessions. How the invoice matched his work schedule perfectly. Her voice cracked when she demanded to know which employee he'd been spending all this special time with. Was it someone from accounting? Sales? I heard her scream at him to get his hands off her. The sound of something hitting a desk made me jump. Maybe she'd thrown the invoice, or slammed her purse. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was really happening. Janet was upstairs, tearing Ralph apart, and I had made this happen. The door to Ralph's office must have opened. Now I could hear Janet even clearer, her voice carrying across the main floor. She was asking people directly, moving between desks. Who was getting rides from her husband? I heard Anita's nervous voice. I don't know anything about any rides. Others mumbled similar things, trying to disappear. Ralph's voice followed Janet, higher pitched now, begging her to please just go home, so they could talk privately. She told him she was done with private talks. Done with his lies. The entire office had stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The copy machine beeped its ready signal. Nobody went to pick up their copies. The whole world was watching Ralph's wife hunt for the woman from the invoice. I knew I had to go upstairs. Sitting in the basement hiding felt cowardly. Besides, Janet deserved the truth, even if the invoice itself was fake. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. The metal stairs rang under my feet as I climbed. When my head cleared the top, I saw it all. Janet stood in the middle of the room, near the copy machine, turning in a slow circle, scanning faces. She was maybe 5 feet 4 inches, dark hair in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater, like she'd thrown on whatever was closest when she found the invoice. Ralph stood a few feet away, hands out, trying to calm a wild animal. Anita sat at her desk, hand over her mouth. Everyone else was frozen, pretending to look at their screens but watching Janet, waiting. Then her eyes locked on me. The second I stepped onto the main floor, I was the only woman coming up from the basement. The only woman Ralph had any reason to isolate. Her face shifted, from angry confusion to a terrible understanding. In about 2 seconds flat, she started walking towards me. I wanted to run, to go back down those stairs, but my feet wouldn't move. Ralph saw where she was looking. His face went white. He moved to get between us, but Janet was faster. She stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could see tears in her eyes, even though her voice stayed hard. "Are you the one?" she asked. "Are you the employee getting the girlfriend experience from my husband?" Ralph jumped in before I could answer, practically shouting that Janet was making a scene, over nothing that she needed to leave. He grabbed her arm. She yanked it away so hard she stumbled backward. She pulled the crumpled invoice from her pocket and shoved it in his face. Her hands were shaking as she pointed at the itemized list. She read out loud, "Romantic drives on October 15th. Scenic tours on October 23rd. Intimate conversation sessions every morning for 3 months. She demanded he explain how those dates and times matched his work schedule exactly. She asked about the note, about him referring his poker friends to my business. Ralph kept trying to say it was a misunderstanding, a prank, that she was being crazy and embarrassing herself. Something inside me just snapped. Maybe it was hearing him call his wife crazy when he was the one who'd harassed me for months. Maybe it was seeing the raw pain on Janet's face, knowing I'd caused it, even though Ralph deserved to be exposed. I looked straight at Janet. The words came out before I could stop them. I told her everything. Ralph offered me rides when my car broke down. He started making inappropriate advances after a few weeks. He demanded I pay him $800 or go to dinner with him when I refused. My voice shook so bad I had to stop and breathe between sentences. But I kept going. This was the first time I'd told the truth about Ralph in front of witnesses who might actually believe me. The relief of finally saying it out loud made my whole body feel lighter, even though my hands still trembled. Ralph's face was ashen. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I described his hand on my knee at red lights. His comments about my skirts and perfume. The longer routes past romantic restaurants. The itemized bill. His offer to waive it if I had dinner with him. Anita made a gasping sound from her desk. She stood up. I saw Ralph touch her knee in the parking lot once, she said, her voice small. I didn't know what to do. Her admission was like a life raft. Someone else had seen it. Someone else knew I wasn't making this up. Janet turned back to Ralph. Her expression was cold, scarier than her yelling had been. This explains everything about his behavior lately, she said, her voice low. The defensive way he acted about his phone. All the late nights at the office. She told him she was taking the kids to her mother's house tonight. He shouldn't bother coming home. Ralph tried to argue, his voice weak. He said she was overreacting. He said I was lying because I'd gotten into trouble at work. Janet just stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Violet from HR appeared, her face tight, a professional smile plastered on. She tried to usher everyone back to their desks. She told Janet this wasn't appropriate workplace behavior, and they should schedule a proper meeting. Janet actually laughed, a bitter sound that made Violet flinch. What isn't appropriate, Janet spat, is HR protecting a sexual harasser who retaliates against women who reject him. What isn't appropriate is believing a man just because he has a fancy title, while treating his victim like a liar. Violet's face went red. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Janet headed for the exit, but stopped at the door, turning one last time. Her voice carried across the silent office. My lawyer will be very interested in this invoice. My lawyer will be very interested in Ralph's pattern of predatory behavior toward employees. And I hope everyone in this office remembers they witnessed this conversation. The door closed behind her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like an hour. Ralph stood in the middle of the floor, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His expensive suit suddenly looked too big. His confident boss posture had collapsed into something hunched and defeated. People's eyes darted between him, me, Anita, and Violet. Someone's computer made a notification sound. It seemed impossibly loud. Violet cleared her throat, trying again to tell people to get back to work. This time people actually moved, but slowly, like they were underwater. Whispered conversations started, spreading like wildfire. Ralph disappeared into his office, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the glass walls. Violet grabbed my arm and pulled me into the nearest conference room. Her grip was tight, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. She closed the door, sat down across from me with a legal pad, her hand shaking so bad the pen scratched against the paper before she even started writing. Explain everything that happened, she said, her voice higher than normal. I took a breath and started from the beginning, the real beginning, the one I'd been too scared to tell her 3 weeks ago. I described the car rides, the gradual escalation from normal work talk to creepy comments, the hand on my knee, his complaints about Janet, the hints about younger women, the dinner invitation for a promotion, and the itemized bill for $800 when I refused. Nothing is free, he'd said. Violet's pen moved in quick bursts. her expression growing sicker with every detail. I described being moved to the basement, the weekend shifts, the denied vacation, my projects given away. Then, I described coming to HR 3 weeks ago, reporting the retaliation, and how Ralph told her I'd been inappropriate. Violet stopped writing. She looked up at me, an expression like she'd been punched in the stomach. I had no idea, she whispered, her voice cracking. Ralph seemed so credible during that meeting. You seemed defensive and emotional. She closed her eyes for a moment. I should have dug deeper. But Ralph's story, it made sense at the time. Why would a married father of 5 lie about something like that? Anger flashed through me, hot and sharp. But I kept my voice steady. That's exactly why predators like Ralph get away with it for so long. She flinched at the word predator, but didn't argue. Violet put down her pen and rubbed her face. The company could face serious legal liability, she said almost to herself. Sexual harassment, retaliation. Her eyes darted around the room, calculating. Have you contacted a lawyer? Do you plan to file charges? I told her no. I didn't want a lawsuit, a legal battle. I just wanted to do my job without being harassed or punished. I wanted my desk back upstairs, my weekend shifts canceled, my vacation approved. Violet nodded so fast her whole body moved. Immediately, she said, I'll approve all of it. I'll escalate this to upper management right away. Lucas O'Donnell from the executive team will need to be involved. Probably company legal counsel. She promised a thorough investigation. Do you feel safe continuing to work here? She asked. Do you need any immediate accommodations? I feel safe, I said, as long as Ralph isn't my supervisor anymore. She wrote that down, with 3 underlines beneath it. Ralph left the building around 2 p.m. without speaking to anyone. Anita saw him, head down, carrying his briefcase, walking straight to the parking lot. Within an hour, everyone knew. He'd been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. The news spread through the office in whispers, in hushed conversations by the coffee machine. People started treating me differently. Some coworkers stopped by my basement desk, quietly saying they were glad I'd spoken up, that Ralph had made them uncomfortable too. Others avoided eye contact, like they were scared of getting involved. A few gave sympathetic looks, but said nothing. I packed up my things, knowing I'd be moving back upstairs soon. The basement felt even more isolated now that I understood how deliberate Ralph's punishment had been. After work, Anita found me in the parking lot. She jogged to catch up, her eyes red. I need to apologize, she said, her voice breaking, for not speaking up sooner. She'd seen Ralph touch my knee, seen him follow me to the break room, stand too close, heard his inappropriate comments. She was scared, she admitted, scared of Ralph's power, scared of becoming his next target. I felt terrible, she whispered, staying silent while you got punished. I told her I understood, that I didn't blame her. She hugged me, promising she'd give a statement to HR. That felt like a massive weight lifted. A witness. My story was harder to dismiss now. That evening, I replayed Janet's confrontation over and over. Her face, the moment she realized Ralph had been lying for years. The pain in her voice. The fake invoice had worked perfectly. But the cost? Janet was hurt and humiliated. Their 5 kids would have to deal with their parents' marriage falling apart because of their father's predatory behavior. I felt guilty about the deception, even though Ralph absolutely deserved to be exposed. I'd used Janet as a weapon without her consent. Now, she was dealing with the consequences I'd set in motion. The invoice was brilliant, effective, but it wasn't clean. I'd lied to create a truth, and that complexity sat heavy in my chest. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sick. I made myself dinner, barely tasting it. Was there another way to expose Ralph that didn't hurt his family? Would staying silent have been worse than this messy, complicated justice? I didn't have answers, but I knew I couldn't undo what I'd done. The next morning, my belongings were already back at my original desk on the main floor. My computer set up, files organized. A note from Violet was taped to my monitor. Weekend shifts canceled. Vacation request approved. A wave of relief washed over me, stinging my eyes. Coworkers stopped by. A woman from accounting said Ralph made her uncomfortable at the holiday party. A guy from shipping said Ralph had a reputation. A woman from sales said she'd turned down a position on his team because of rumors. Each conversation made me realize how many people had known, but felt powerless. Ralph's pattern had been an open secret, until Janet forced it into the open. Lucas O'Donnell from upper management called me into a meeting that afternoon. He seemed genuinely concerned, not just covering liability. He asked detailed questions, taking notes on a tablet. He wanted to know everything. The timeline of events, the itemized bill, my transfer to the basement, the HR meeting 3 weeks ago. His questions were specific and thorough. He told me the company took harassment and retaliation seriously. I wanted to believe him, but I'd heard similar promises from Violet. Then he shifted. About that executive transportation solutions invoice Janet brought to the office. My stomach dropped. Sweat broke out on my palms. I kept my face neutral. Janet must have found some service Ralph was using, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. I don't know the details, but it seemed like he was paying for something he didn't want his wife to know about. I shook my head, avoiding making up details. Lucas seemed more focused on Ralph's documented harassment. He said they'd retrieved deleted emails from Ralph's account, showing he'd complained about me to other managers, calling me ungrateful and problematic. This proved Ralph's retaliation was deliberate. My case was strengthened. I left his office relieved he hadn't pushed harder about the invoice, but that lie was still out there, waiting to explode. 2 days later, Lucas called me back. He turned his tablet toward me. Email after email. Ralph complaining about me to other regional managers, calling me ungrateful, saying I had an attitude problem, telling the VP of operations I was problematic, suggesting a performance improvement plan. Ralph had been building a paper trail, coordinating with others to destroy my reputation. This wasn't just personal anger. It was a calculated campaign. I felt sick reading his lies, so professionally written, seeing how easily he'd manipulated other executives. The next morning, Violet called. The company lawyer needed to meet with me. Olivia Smith. Sharp eyes, expensive suit. She wanted to know if I planned to pursue legal action. She emphasized how seriously the company took harassment. She asked detailed questions about my damages, whether I'd sought medical treatment for stress. I could tell she was worried about a lawsuit. I told her I just wanted to do my job without harassment and have the retaliation reversed. She nodded, making notes, calculating potential liability with every answer. That afternoon, my desk phone rang. Unfamiliar number. Janet, could we meet for coffee? I need to understand what really happened with Ralph. My stomach dropped. I almost said no, but something in her voice made me pause. She sounded exhausted, not angry, like she just wanted the truth. I agreed to meet her the next day. I spent the rest of the afternoon terrified. I owed her some version of the truth, but I couldn't tell her about creating the fake invoice. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing what I'd say. The coffee shop was mostly empty. Janet sat in a corner booth, looking nothing like the furious woman who'd stormed our office. Tired, older, dark circles under her eyes. No makeup. She thanked me for coming, her hand shaking slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. Ralph swore nothing physical happened, she said, but I don't believe him anymore. Not after 23 years of his lies. She asked directly, what did he do? My throat tightened. I told her everything. Honestly. The car rides, his comments, the longer routes, his hand on my knee. His complaints about Janet, his hints about younger women. The dinner invitation. The itemized bill demanding $800. The basement relocation. The weekend shifts. How he told HR I'd been inappropriate. Janet listened without interrupting, tears silently sliding down her face as I confirmed what she'd suspected for years. When I finished, she cried openly. Thank you, she choked out, for finally giving me proof I wasn't crazy. This wasn't Ralph's first time, she explained. She'd suspected inappropriate behavior before, but he always made her feel paranoid, jealous. Suspicious texts he'd explained away. Late nights at the office that didn't match his calendar. Credit card charges at restaurants he claimed were client meetings. Every time she questioned him, he'd turn it around, saying she was controlling, that she needed therapy. She'd started believing she was the problem. Hearing my story confirmed her instincts had been right all along. She wiped her eyes. I'm filing for divorce. She needed documentation of Ralph's behavior for custody proceedings. She wanted to protect her kids. I felt horrible watching her marriage collapse. Even though Ralph caused this, the guilt sat heavy in my chest. I'd weaponized her pain. Janet must have noticed something in my face. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "You're not responsible for Ralph's choices," she said firmly. "He destroyed our family. He's a predator who couldn't respect boundaries. I'm grateful you spoke up. It gave me the courage to finally leave instead of spending more years making excuses for him." Her biggest regret, she said, was not trusting her instincts sooner, not protecting other women from Ralph. She squeezed my hand. We were both victims of Ralph's manipulation. Neither of us should carry guilt for his actions. Back at work, more details emerged. 2 other former employees had contacted HR about Ralph's inappropriate behavior. Both women had left the company rather than fight him. One said Ralph commented on her body during performance reviews, then tanked her raise when she declined drinks. Another described him cornering her, asking about her dating life, then reassigning her when she complained. Lucas showed me their written statements. I realized how close I'd come to just quitting myself. Their experiences proved this wasn't about me specifically. It was about Ralph's systematic abuse of power. 3 days later, Lucas called me again, his expression serious. "Ralph's lawyer sent the company a letter," he said, "claiming you fabricated harassment allegations as revenge for legitimate performance management. The letter accused me of creating a hostile work environment. It said the basement relocation was standard inventory management restructuring. The weekend shifts, normal scheduling rotation." Lucas asked if I had any additional evidence. His tone was careful, but I could tell this letter had made the company nervous. That night I gathered everything. A notebook where I'd written down every uncomfortable comment Ralph made, with dates and exact quotes. The itemized bill Ralph gave me, demanding $800 in his own handwriting. Text messages where he asked why I was being cold. My original vacation request form, denied by Ralph. Emails showing my previous weekend schedule compared to the new one. The next morning, I brought it all to Lucas. I watched him photograph each piece of evidence with his phone. Combined with Anita's witness statement and the deleted emails showing Ralph's coordination, the evidence became overwhelming. That afternoon, Violet spoke with me privately. She closed the door. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. She apologized for not believing me, for making assumptions based on Ralph's seniority, his reputation as a family man. "I let those biases cloud my judgment," she admitted. "I'm sorry for the institutional betrayal that left you suffering alone in the basement while Ralph faced no consequences." She meant it, but her apology didn't change the weeks I'd spent isolated, punished, while she protected Ralph because believing him was easier than challenging a powerful manager. I thanked her, but knew trust wouldn't come back easily. 2 weeks later, Lucas called me into a conference room. With him was the company's lawyer. Lucas slid a folder across the table. "The company wants to offer you a settlement package." I opened it. Numbers that made my stomach flip. Back pay for weekend shifts. Compensation for emotional distress. A promotion to senior inventory manager. A 15% raise. The lawyer said it wasn't an admission of wrongdoing, but recognition of my valuable contributions. I nodded but didn't sign anything. It felt surreal. "Need time to think about it?" Lucas asked. "Yes," I managed, trying to keep my hands from shaking. That evening, I called my friend, a lawyer. She came to my apartment, read through every page. "This is quite generous," she said after 20 minutes. "They're terrified you'll sue them." She advised me to negotiate for a strong reference letter and a guaranteed no retaliation clause. We drafted an email to Lucas. 3 weeks after the investigation started, Lucas sent a company-wide email. Ralph's employment terminated immediately. Violation of harassment policies. Abuse of managerial authority. I was at my desk when it came through. I watched people read it, some shocked, others nodding. An hour later, Ralph walked through the office, carrying a cardboard box. A security guard behind him. Ralph kept his eyes down. His face was red, shoulders hunched. He didn't look at anyone. Straight to the elevator. The security guard pressed the button. They stood in awkward silence while the entire floor pretended to work, but really watched Ralph's final moments. When the doors opened, he stepped inside and disappeared. I felt a weird mix of satisfaction and emptiness. I'd wanted him gone, but seeing it happen felt anticlimactic after all the build-up. The office atmosphere changed, like someone opened windows in a stuffy room. People joked more. Break room conversations got louder. Anita said she could breathe for the first time in months. Ralph's toxic presence had affected more people than just the women he targeted. His mood swings, his power plays, made everyone walk on eggshells. A guy from accounting said he'd been planning to quit because of Ralph, but now he was reconsidering. Lucas introduced me to Sterling Frost, my new supervisor. Sterling was calm, professional. In our first meeting, he kept his office door open. Said he believed in clear boundaries, transparent communication. He'd copy HR on performance discussions, encouraged me to do the same if I ever felt uncomfortable. The contrast with Ralph was so stark, it almost made me cry. This was how normal professional relationships were supposed to work. Sterling asked about my career goals. I actually listened. When he shook my hand, he thanked me for my patience during the difficult transition. I met with Lucas again. I accepted the settlement, but I added 2 weeks of vacation time and asked for a commitment to anti-harassment training for all managers. Lucas agreed, with almost no negotiation. My lawyer friend was right. They were desperate to avoid a lawsuit. I signed the papers. The money helped with car repairs, therapy bills. But what mattered more was feeling heard, validated. The company sent an email announcing new harassment prevention training. I felt cautiously hopeful. Maybe my situation would prevent future employees from going through the same nightmare. Janet's divorce proceeded quickly. Her lawyer subpoenaed company records of Ralph's behavior for custody. Lucas asked if I'd provide a statement. I said yes immediately. She deserved to protect her kids. I wrote a detailed statement describing Ralph's predatory pattern, how he'd groomed me, then demanded payment. Janet's lawyer thanked me. My statement, combined with company records, painted a clear picture of Ralph's inability to respect boundaries. I hoped it would help her get primary custody. Those kids didn't need to grow up thinking their father's behavior was normal. I started seeing a therapist. The anxiety attacks wouldn't stop. Even with Ralph gone, I'd tense up walking down the hallway to Sterling's office. One time during a routine inventory audit discussion, I couldn't breathe. My hands shook. The room tilted. Sterling noticed immediately. He got me water, suggested we talk later. I felt embarrassed. My therapist explained it was a trauma response. My body had learned to associate private meetings with male authority figures with danger. She taught me breathing exercises, grounding techniques. Healing wasn't linear, she said. Setbacks were normal. Slowly, the panic attacks became less frequent. 6 months after Janet's confrontation, Lucas pulled me aside. Would you be willing to speak at a company-wide meeting about workplace culture? He asked. The executive team wanted to address harassment prevention, the importance of believing victims. My experience, he said, could help others. I was nervous about standing in front of hundreds of coworkers, sharing personal details. But staying silent protected predators. Speaking up protected future targets. I agreed. I wrote notes about retaliation tactics, about fear, keeping victims quiet. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror until I could get through it without crying. The meeting happened. I stood at the podium. My hands shook as I started talking, but I focused on my notes. I explained how Ralph used his position, how his retaliation made reporting him feel impossible, how institutional responses often prioritize protecting the company over employees. Believing victims the first time they report, I said, my voice growing stronger, saves them from having to orchestrate their own justice through desperate measures. I made eye contact. Several people nodded. Some women wiped their eyes. I finished by saying that workplace culture only changes when everyone commits to calling out inappropriate behavior and supporting targets, instead of questioning their motives. The room was silent for 3 seconds. Then applause. It lasted almost a minute. Tears ran down my face. Afterwards, at least 15 people approached me to share their own experiences, to thank me for my courage. 3 women described situations where male coworkers had crossed boundaries and they'd stayed silent. Two men said my presentation made them realize they'd witnessed inappropriate behavior and done nothing. One older woman hugged me. "I was harassed 30 years ago," she said. "Never reported it. No one would have believed me." The conversations lasted an hour. I was emotionally drained but validated. My messy revenge had created space for honest discussion. Lucas found me as people were leaving. He pulled me aside. The executive team was genuinely committed to cultural change, he said. They acknowledged they'd failed me. "Would you be willing to join a committee?" he asked, developing better harassment response protocols. HR, legal advisors, employee advocates, clearer reporting procedures, stronger protections. I was skeptical. Did they really want change, or just to avoid lawsuits? But refusing meant letting others make decisions without my experience. I told Lucas I'd join. I heard through former coworkers that Ralph was working at a much smaller medical supply company across town. He'd applied for several director positions, but couldn't get hired after his termination showed up in background checks. He ended up taking a non-management role, inventory coordination, for half his previous salary. Satisfaction mixed with frustration. His victims carried lasting trauma. He just moved to a smaller company and started over. I wondered if his new coworkers knew, or if he was already testing boundaries. The thought made me angry, but I reminded myself I couldn't control what happened at other companies. I'd done what I could to expose him and protect future targets at my workplace. Anita got promoted to team lead. She immediately established a mentorship program. Clear guidelines, check-in points where ments could report problems confidentially. She credited our experience with Ralph for inspiring her. Watching me fight back had shown her that staying silent enables predators. Speaking up creates change. I felt proud of her. My therapist acknowledged the invoice was deceptive, but she asked, "What other weapons did you have available when HR believed Ralph's lies and punished you?" I started crying. I'd been carrying so much guilt. She helped me understand that demanding perfect victim behavior for myself was another form of self-punishment. Real people in impossible situations make messy choices. That doesn't make them as bad as their abusers. Over several sessions, I learned to accept moral complexity. The invoice was dishonest, but it accomplished what the proper channels refused to do. It protected future targets. It gave Janet information. I slowly started sleeping better. Janet texted me 3 months later. Wanted to meet for coffee again. I felt nervous. Did she blame me for her divorce? She was already sitting at a corner table. Looked completely different. Hairstyled, professional clothes, a confident smile. She hugged me. Immediately started talking about her new job. Back in marketing after 15 years raising kids. Her old company welcomed her back. She was managing a team. Rebuilding her life. Finding herself outside of being Ralph's wife. Then she said something that made me laugh, despite my lingering guilt. "Your invoice," she joked, was the push I needed to stop making excuses for Ralph's behavior. While the method was unconventional, the result was liberation. She thanked me for giving her proof she couldn't rationalize away. We talked for 2 hours. Her oldest daughter had thanked her for finally leaving Ralph. Janet seemed genuinely happy. It eased some of my guilt. I met Noah at a friend's dinner party. Software development. Zero connection to medical supply companies. We talked about hiking. He offered to give me a ride home. I immediately tensed up, remembering Ralph. Noah noticed my hesitation. He quickly said he'd call me a ride share instead, if that was more comfortable. That simple respect for my boundary, without guilt or pressure, made me agree to see him again. My therapist said this awareness was healthy self-protection. Noah was patient as I slowly opened up. He listened without trying to fix anything. He asked what boundaries I needed, and then actually respected them. The company won an industry award for workplace culture improvements. Lucas invited me to the ceremony. I sat in the audience, genuinely proud of the changes. Outside investigators for retaliation claims. Quarterly training for managers. Multiple confidential channels for reporting problems. The recognition validated that speaking up had created real positive impact. My messy revenge had accidentally sparked institutional change. During the reception, executives thanked me for my courage. I felt uncomfortable with the praise. My initial motivation was revenge, not noble whistleblowing. But my therapist had helped me understand that impure motivations can still create valuable outcomes. A professional organization focused on workplace equity invited me to join their advisory board. They wanted someone with direct experience. I shared my experience of HR believing Ralph, the retaliation, how the proper channels failed me. The group was developing model legislation. I suggested requiring independent investigators for cases involving power imbalances, automatic retaliation investigations. Channeling my anger into systemic change felt more productive than dwelling on what Ralph had taken from me. I was using my experience to prevent other women from being trapped in basements. Michelle, one of the former employees who'd contacted HR during Ralph's investigation, reached out. She'd left the company 3 years earlier. Ralph made her work environment unbearable. Hearing about his termination gave her courage to pursue legal action against her current employer for similar retaliation. Her new boss had propositioned her, then tanked her performance reviews. I met her for lunch. I shared everything I'd learned about documenting harassment. I connected her with my lawyer friend. Helping Michelle felt like paying forward the solidarity I wish I'd had earlier. 6 months later, she texted. Her company settled. Her harasser demoted. Significant compensation. Knowing I'd helped her achieve justice made my own messy journey feel more worthwhile. Sterling nominated me for a company leadership program. I almost declined, thinking my history made me too controversial. But Sterling insisted the company valued employees who stood up for what was right. The selection committee agreed. I was accepted into a cohort preparing for director-level positions. The opportunity felt like proof that speaking up hadn't destroyed my career. I'd worried about being labeled a troublemaker. Instead, the company was investing in my professional development, treating my integrity as an asset. Sterling told me privately that leadership needed people who'd fight for employees, not just protect institutional power. I took a vacation, using the time Ralph had previously denied me. A week hiking in national parks, completely disconnected. The physical distance helped me gain perspective. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months earlier, accepting Ralph's inappropriate rides because I needed transportation. So grateful I'd minimized the boundary violations, blamed myself. Now I understood. Gratitude doesn't obligate anyone to accept mistreatment. I'd learned to trust my instincts. The mountains reminded me that some problems require unconventional solutions, and perfect victims don't exist in real life. I checked Ralph's LinkedIn. He'd moved to a different state, new position at a small medical supply distributor in